Hello everyone, Dr. Cap's coming back to you again for another episode of Dancing with the Darkness. This is our YouTube channel and our podcast, and it is an unapologetic, raw, unfiltered account of living with CPTSD. We also talk about operator syndrome, severe depression, and anxiety. They all are comorbid with each other, with developmental trauma in there as well. And this is just, not just a podcast about living with CPTSD, but it's also a message of hope. And we bring in elements of clinical stuff, but we also mainly talk about the experiential part of living with CPTSD and the challenges that are presented. And most of all, this is a message of hope because just like this podcast, we all have the ability to take our pain and turn it into purpose. And that is why we are here. So thank you so much for the return listeners that come back every week and listen. Without your support, we wouldn't have this channel. And the more support we get, the more of you that like and share these videos, the more reach we can get. And we are simply trying to help those that are suffering with CPTSD symptoms, and for them to know that they are not alone, but also that there is absolutely a way for us to turn this pain into purpose and to do something worthwhile with our lives that have an impact, a positive impact. So those of you that are tuning in today, if this speaks to you today, please do us a favor and like or subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. It's the only way for us to get out there to the public, the only way that I'm able to help other folks. So thank you so much. We welcome your comments. We welcome any kind of feedback. It's of tremendous value to us. So thank you so much. So today I want to talk about some things that, plague me sometimes. They bother me sometimes. It's a challenge for me a lot of the time. And I want to talk about these. It's kind of like a hamster wheel in our brain with CPTSD. We have these reflexive thoughts and these reflexive feelings that tend to just kind of stick around, and they like to rear their ugly head, and they like to do it whenever they feel like it. It doesn't have any kind of opportune time. It's almost, we talked about the invisible prisons of having CPTSD in a past video. We talked about how difficult that is, that there's places that we live in our minds that other people may not understand. That is reflexive, and it's just where we feel like we end up most of the time. And so this has to do with the echoes of the trauma that we've been through. And our own mind can kind of feel like an inescapable cell. It's kind of a relentless loop that gets played in our thoughts. It's like a broken record almost. And it's, these songs that are playing on this record are not the songs that we really want to hear. These are songs of fear and blame and loneliness. Okay. And so these aren't just, passing worries that we might have during the day. This is, something that's very heavy and persistent, and these thought patterns, they like to color every moment of every day. They can be, the background noise to an otherwise, quiet room, and they tend to be, so loud that this static will often drown out the joy that we have. I want to go over 6 of them in particular that tend to be something that I have to cope with myself, and that I see my clients cope with. And half of this battle is obviously for us to just have awareness of what we're dealing with. And this is part of the real important part, is the awareness, understanding exactly what is happening, and why we are feeling the way that we do, and the reasons why we're feeling those ways. So, that sometimes these can be really, really difficult to shut off. And so we're also going to talk about some ways, how we can take and try to quiet some of these thoughts, and, why they tend to plague us like they do. The first one is this whole blame game. It was my fault. And I want you to understand where this comes from. Okay, this is a very cunning and cruel looping thought that happens within the CPTSD brain. In a desperate attempt, our mind tries to make sense of something that is basically senseless. It likes to rewind the tapes of our past. It likes to play back frame by frame, and it's trying to search for a single moment somewhere in there where, we shoulda, coulda, or woulda. That's what I call them. I call them the shoulda, coulda, or woulda, and our brain can't process that, and that's why this is so cruel. But basically, it's our mind is becoming a detective, and we are the only suspect in this crime. And it whispers to us, if only you would have done this, if only you would have done, said this, or, I should have done this, I could have done this, And so we're looking for this outcome to be different if we would have, or should have, or could have done something else. And, this is very cruel. It's a cruel game that our mind and our thoughts play on us, because we cannot really process anything that doesn't have evidence. We can't, we have to have an outcome. We have to have something that we can have closure to. And so basically, we're creating this illusion of control in our mind by blaming ourselves. As long as we blame ourselves for the outcome of whatever happened in our past and it's our fault, then we have this illusion of control. And, now we have some power in this situation, because often trauma, we are powerless. It's stuff that gets done to us by other people, especially as children, and we had no power to stop it. And so our brain is searching for some sort of rational way to have some control of this, and it becomes a really unhealthy defense mechanism as well. We accept that some things are random, chaotic, and completely out of our hands, but when we do that, it can feel even more terrifying than guilt. And so we don't have this capacity to look at things without blame. And the sad part is that we often blame ourselves. So if we think of any other way but of having guilt, then it's really makes us have what's called cognitive dissonance, and we really don't feel comfortable at all. And this is basically the sign of a mind that's trying to build a fortress against future pain, using the wrong materials, the wrong building materials, basically, to make this fortress. Okay, it's basically a heavy blanket of shame that we carry everywhere. It doesn't matter where we are, we end up carrying this shame everywhere. It affects every decision that we make. It makes us second guess ourselves constantly. It poisons our relationships, and it makes us feel, unworthy of any kind of kindness or any kind of treatment that's positive, because deep down we believe that we're the one to blame for our own suffering. It's our fault. And, this gets programmed and hardwired into us as kids, especially. The truth is that blaming ourselves is strange. It's a strange and painful way of pretending that we are in control of the uncontrollable. Okay. The second thing that we constantly have to deal with is that we feel like we're always in danger. We are in constant danger all the time. This turns the entire world into the threat. This is where our outer critic really chimes in and starts to talk to us. And it's basically telling us that everyone has the, and there's some truth to this, and this is why it's scary, because everybody does have the capacity to be evil. Everybody does have the capacity to harm you. But we also need to understand that the flip side of that is that everybody also has the capacity to not be that person that hurts you, that is, capable of being kind and being a positive part of what's going on in your life. And so we need to understand that even though that outer critic is turning everything into a threat, it's not necessarily the truth. And it's hard, but we can rewire that thought process. That's what we call cortex-based beliefs, and that's something that we can rewire by changing the narrative, reframing the situation. But we also need to understand that our amygdala was hijacked at a very early age, and so we had some genuine bona fide threats that we had to react to, and our brain and our nervous system reacted accordingly. And so the amygdala, which is basically our threat detector of the brain, it gets stuck in this position of alert and thinking that we are in danger. The war may be over, but the body and the mind are still on high alert all the time, and they're constantly scanning for enemies. This is what we call neuroception, where we are constantly in a state of scanning our environment for any kind of dangers. Okay. So it's not just a feeling of being a little anxious. Okay. This is a little bit beyond that. This is a state of being in known hypervigilance, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. So this feeling that the world is a threat also gets us stuck in this pattern of being hypervigilant. And, so, little things that I think of, like a car backfiring, it might sound like a gunshot to me, right? So that startles me. I have a startle response. Sometimes being in a crowded room can feel really suffocating. And it's not that I'm not social. I actually am a very social person, and I have a love-hate relationship with people, because I really do love people and love to be around people and love to help people. But sometimes it can feel suffocating and it can feel a little scary. So the cliche that we hear a lot with PTSD is, how we're the people who sit with their, the wall to our back in the restaurant. We always need to see the exits and all of these things. And this is something that, where our senses have been turned up on maximum volume, and we have a lot of experiential reasons why. Okay, if you're a combat veteran or even a child abuse survivor, many times we were in a fight or flight state all of the time, and so we can get stuck in that position. Our amygdala can be damaged and wounded and injured, and we can get stuck in that. We can get to this point. I myself am very sensitive, and I can notice every shift in tone of voice, every subtle change in someone's expression, every sound that's out of place. Living this way is exhausting. Okay, I'm going to tell you, from experience, and if you're listening to this and you deal with this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Especially the older we get, our nervous system, we just can't tolerate this like we used to. Our muscles are always tense. Our heart is always ready to race or to accelerate. Our breathing becomes shallow. The body is constantly flooded with stress hormones, especially cortisol, which we know causes all kinds of problems. But we also are dealing with adrenaline, and we're literally preparing for fight or flight that never comes. Okay, and so this is very, very hard because we don't have an outlet for that fight or flight. There's really, no outcome. So this becomes that loop that continues to play. So we can't relax. We can't feel safe. True rest feels like a distant memory. Like, you might say, yeah, I rested or I slept, but we really don't. We don't really sleep, and we don't really rest like we need to. It's because this thought loop is constantly convincing us that our safety, any kind of safety, is really an illusion, and the danger is the only reality. And this doesn't have to be physical danger. This also can be mental. A lot of times, when I'm talking about feeling the shift in the room and people's different tones and their facial expressions and all of those things changing, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that I immediately will feel some anxiety, and I will have some fear, and I will go into fight or flight because that hypervigilant voice, that amygdala, is telling me that that is a hostility or that is a danger towards me, when most often it has nothing to do with me whatsoever. That we have a bad day or something happens in our own lives and we change our expression or our tone. It has nothing to do with the people around us. But that hypervigilant nervous system is always looking for any shift to be a danger, and it goes into protection mode, and it just doesn't know how to stand down. Another thing that sticks with us, we talked about how the outer critic is always talking to us. Well, the inner critic is always talking to us too, right? We started off with, talking about how we always find some sort of way to blame ourselves, okay? And I want you to understand too that we often are in relationships, and we stay in relationships with people that are the voice of our parents or whoever was critical of us. So, we're not only having this automatic reflexive thought of being the one to blame or being the one that is wrong. We may be in relationships where that person, actually expresses that narrative. If you're with a narcissistic person or you're with an abusive person, they're going to continue that narrative, and all it's going to do is reinforce the voice that's already within you. And so we need to be conscious of that. And so that comes to this next thought, that we are permanently broken. One of the first things that we did that I think is wrong is that we called post-traumatic stress a disorder, or we call it complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, so disorder in itself makes us think of a permanence. It makes us think of something that is, permanent. It's never going away. I have this disorder. I'm defective. And really, it's an injury. It is an injury. We should be calling it PTSI or CPTSI, because we can see that with healing, certain therapeutic interventions, different things that we do, we can see visibly with science and medicine that the parts of the brain that were damaged from the trauma, such as the hypothalamus, the amygdala, we see the restorative power of the body, and we see them heal and come back online neurologically, and we can see it on scans of the brain. We can read it through biofeedback and neurofeedback. So we need to understand that you do heal, okay? And if we can change our psychology there and how we think about it, and that it is something that can heal, that it's an injury, this, I think, sets up the proper modus operandi in our brain for healing and for having a healing environment. This thought that we're permanently broken, we talk a lot about how CPTSD, we never forged an identity and never understood what our identity. Well, this thought really does attack us at the core. It attacks us at the very identity that we're supposed to have. It tells us that the trauma didn't just happen to us. It has become part of us. It's like a crack in a precious piece of crystal that is permanent, that can't be fixed. You feel that even though somebody might have glued us back together, or there's a book called Restoring the Shattered Self. That's an amazing book, and it's basically we're just this shattered piece of glass that somebody tried to hodgepodge back together, and so we may be in one piece, but the scars and the cracks and the disorientation of the pieces are all very, very present, and we need to understand that. So the lines of damage, because we've been glued back together, they're going to be there forever. We are no longer whole. We are damaged goods forever. Okay. So this thought is creating this deep divide in our life. There's the before person, and then there's the after person. And so, we find ourselves in this loop of looking back at the old photos of ourselves, and, we feel like we may even be looking at a stranger when we do that. Somebody that might have been lighter, that may have been more innocent and more complete. The person that you are now feels like a lesser version. It's like a shadow of who you need to be. The belief system is so devastating because it closes the door on hope, and we have to have hope. If we believe that we are fundamentally and permanently broken, then why even try to heal, right? Why should we even try? Why, what is the purpose? We should just, crawl off in a corner somewhere and die, right? And that's not truth. It's lies. It's lies from the pit of hell, as far as I'm concerned. It feeds these feelings of hopelessness, and it makes us pull away from others as well. We may have some well-meaning, good, wonderful people in our lives that are actually trying to help us heal, that are trying to make things better for us, and we pull away from this because it's such a foreign feeling that we can't believe for 1 second that we are not broken or tainted or permanently damaged. So we tell ourselves these lies, like, if people really knew who I was, they would leave. They're not going to stick around. And so this keeps us from pursuing any kind of dreams that we have. It keeps us from forming any new relationships. And honestly, it keeps us from enjoying a good day, honestly, without some sort of nagging feeling that we don't deserve it. So anytime anything good comes to us, we feel shame and guilt, like we don't deserve it. And so we can't even have a good day. We see other people around us moving on with their lives, and we feel stuck all the time. We feel like we're left behind with this core defective part of ourself that is shattered and damaged beyond repair. There is a quiet truth that we need to understand. Healing isn't about erasing the cracks. It's not about becoming the person you were before. It's about learning to see the beauty and strength in the person that we have become. Okay, cracks and all. We need to understand that everything that we've been through, it defines us. It defines our character, and it makes us special. And it gives us the ability to do things that we may not have been able to do if we didn't have these things happen to us. And I think perhaps for me the greatest reward, if you can even call it a reward, is the fact that I can identify with and feel very deeply other people that suffer with CPTSD or have had extensive trauma, because I know what it feels like intimately. And it makes me feel less alone. It makes us as a community feel less alone, but it also, we become very highly effective at helping other individuals because we deeply and truly understand what they're going through. And so we can look at that as a gift, honestly, because we couldn't save ourselves, obviously, but if we can help other people and we can mitigate what's happening to them, it does bring purpose to the suffering that we've been through, and it's very, very powerful. Another one that we have a hard time with, especially in relationships, is we have this belief that no one really understands us. And, in a way, there's some truth to this. It takes one to know one. And oftentimes, it is hard for someone to understand you if they haven't been through traumatic experiences, and that's not their fault. But we also need to understand that we can't generalize and say no one understands me, because that's where we all get stuck, and that's where we get this hopelessness. We need to understand that there's other people that have been through traumatic experiences. There's more than we think. There's more people out there with CPTSD than we think, and they do understand. We understand each other intimately, and we can make an impact in each other's lives. And that this is a big deal, to get rid of these feelings of hopelessness and these loneliness feelings that continue to plague us. When we think of this, that no one understands me, we are literally building our own wall around us of isolation. Trauma, it can be an incredibly lonely experience. We talked about loneliness in the last video and how deep that loneliness runs because of trauma. Even when we're surrounded by people who love and care for us, there can be a feeling of being separated by this thick pane of glass. Like they just can't, they can't really see us. They can't really hear us. We can see them and they can see us, visibly, but they can't really truly connect with us. And that's this wall of isolation that we build around ourselves. It's, we're thinking to ourselves that they live in a world that feels safe and predictable, while we live in a world that has shown us a dark side, right? So we might try to explain that, what we're going through, but the words feel empty. And, how do we describe this feeling of constant dread? How do we put a flashback into a simple sentence, right? Often the attempt to explain is met with well-meaning but unhelpful advice, like just try to be positive, or pull your big boy pants up, it's in the past, you should move on. And so each time this happens, the feeling of being misunderstood only grows stronger. Okay, and some people do it in a condescending way, but most of the time people are well-meaning, and they just don't know. They don't know what to say or to do to comfort us. Okay, and so this fuels that belief that nobody understands us. And then we also have this thing that we do with CPTSD, and we will overshare. Sometimes we are so desperate to connect that before we even get to really know somebody, we may overshare trauma or things that we're going through. And of course, this is going to have an adverse effect, because people are not comfortable with that, because they don't know what to do with it often. So what happens is we start to wear this mask. We have this mask that we're wearing all the time. We already don't really know what our identity is. And so now we're wearing a mask that we feel we have to wear. We have to become this chameleon. This is the only way we feel like that we can connect with anybody. So we start pretending that we're okay, because it's less complicated, honestly, than showing the reality. Okay, so it's easier to just tell people, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay, and we're lying every single time. But we feel like it's just so much easier to just say I'm fine, because how can they possibly even understand what I'm going through? How can they possibly give me any kind of answers or any kind of comfort on how to get out of this? And so this is the deep sense of alienation that forms around us, and it's one of the most painful parts of post-trauma experiences. And so we've talked about this before. We are social animals and we are wired for connection. We were created in God's image, and God is a social and loving God. And so we are created and crafted to be around other individuals and to have connections and to have relationships. And so when this connection is severed by an experience that others can't understand, the loneliness can feel like its own separate wound. So now we have the wound of the trauma, but now we also have a wound of loneliness, and it's several wounds. It's not generalized loneliness. It's just lonely, lonely, lonely down the line. You know, it's vital to remember that loneliness isn't about being alone. We talked about this in the last video. It's about feeling unseen and unheard. You know, so finding even one person who can listen without judgment can be the thread that pulls you out of isolation. Okay, and so we need to understand that's a whole reason, you know, a very big reason for this channel. It's a very big reason for you to like and share these videos, because we need to understand that there's someone out there that can listen to our trauma, that can understand it, and we can feel connected, okay? Because often we're not looking for answers. We're not looking for somebody to solve our problems. We just want somebody to understand so that we don't feel so isolated and alone, okay? So that's why this channel is so important to me, is because I'm trying to, you know, not only help other people and give you answers to help you live a better life, but I'm also trying to forge connections within our community so that we know that we are not alone. Because that's how critical that is. You know, then we have this looping thought that we can't help but have because our brain has been wired. I like to think of it as kind of like, you know, when we first see a bee or a wasp when we're a little kid, we have no fear of it, right? Because, you know, we don't associate it with pain. But the very first time we get stung, it's kind of funny. We're not just afraid of a wasp now. We're afraid of anything with wings, right? It can get that crazy, like a moth or a June bug or something flies by, and you're like, you know, because you've been stung and you associate that with pain. And so, you know, we need to understand how that reflexive thought goes into play. And so now we have this whole methodology in our brain where we're saying, what if it happens again? You know, so while hypervigilance keeps us on guard in the present, this thought drags you into a terrifying future. You know, your imagination. Our imagination, you know, a tool that should be used for creativity and dreaming, becomes our worst enemy, honestly. And it's very, very hard. It likes to build these detailed, vivid scenarios of the trauma reoccurring. So we have these hypothetical scenarios going through our mind all the time because we're trying to keep ourselves safe. We're trying to prepare so that we can be ready for this trauma, but really we're unconsciously torturing ourselves with our imagination, because this whole what if game becomes a constant loop. It becomes this constant hamster wheel that goes over and over in our mind. You know, what if I take this route to work? You know, what if I go to that party? What if I trust this new person? Every new opportunity becomes filtered through the lens of potential disaster. Okay, and so we need to be conscious of that. The mind's job is literally to keep us safe. Okay, it is, you know, there to protect us from future trauma, just like we talked about with the wasp. Okay, the wasp stings us, and so our brain associates that wasp with pain, and so it tells us when we visualize a wasp, hey, stay away from it, it can hurt you. And so this is very, very similar. It basically is doing that with our entire life. Everything becomes the potential for disaster, becomes the potential for danger. It does this by, you know, predicting worst case scenarios for everything that we do. Everything is catastrophic. Everything is going to have a negative outcome. We think of the what ifs. There's a difference between being prepared and being pathologically negative and catastrophizing everything. So there's a big difference there. You know, we are so stuck in this loop of trying to prevent that pain from happening again. This future-faced and focused anxiety, though, it comes at a terrible cost. It's robbing us of our present. You know, I often talk to people with CPTSD, and we have this thing where, you know, we can barely look forward to tomorrow. Okay, we have a very hard time seeing a future. We have a very hard time looking down the road because we literally feel like every single day is survival. Every single day has the potential of being a new set of pain, a new set of loss, a new set of loneliness. Okay, and so It's part of the rewiring and the reframing process that we have to start doing, is we have to allow ourselves to see a future and a present without pain, and to stop intermingling that with the past, because we're so worried about the storm that might come tomorrow, we can't really enjoy, our new relationship, because we're already bracing for the moment that it might fall apart. Joy is always something temporary, and it's also dangerous. We see it as dangerous because it might be taken away. This thought loop keeps us in a state of suspended animation. We are not living in the here and now. We are living in 1,000 potential painful futures that haven't and likely never will happen. So we are literally setting ourselves up. We're not doing it on purpose, but we are unconsciously setting ourselves up for a future of pain, because we're not allowing ourselves to have any kind of joy, or we are afraid to have joy because we know that it can be taken away at a moment's notice. So our life actually becomes a series of avoided risks and missed chances, because the constant worry is a heavy price to pay for a feeling of safety that never truly arrives in our lives. We are basically living in a future that hasn't happened, and it's robbing us of the only moment we truly have, which is right now. And the last one I want to talk about is, I should be over this. And this is an easy one for us to feel, because like we talked about earlier, oftentimes people, out of their own frustration or lack of knowledge or inability to know what to do to help you, they'll give you tough love, and they'll be like, man, you should be over this by now. You shouldn't be grieving that loss, or you shouldn't still be upset over this trauma. And so we're being fed that by people around us, and we also are doing it to ourselves. Okay, we are constantly putting a timeline on our feelings and our ability to be resilient and to come back from traumatic experiences. So we're constantly telling ourselves, hey, I should be over this thing that happened to me by now. So this is another layer of shame. We're going to do a video exclusively on parts of shame that we may not understand happen very soon, because shame is such a huge part of CPTSD. But this is one of these things that adds a layer of shame on top of all of the other pain that we're already having. There's this unspoken timeline that we've put in place, and society likes to put in place, especially for grief and healing. We talk about the 5 stages of grief and all of these things, and quite honestly, I think that that's the biggest pile of garbage I've ever heard, because everybody grieves their own way. It's a very personal experience, and I think that we need to stop trying to help people process grief with a timeline, and you should be at stage 3 by 6 months. We can't say that. We need to allow ourselves to grieve, and we need to grieve the way that we need to, okay? And we need to be surrounded by people that can give us compassion and empathy, and sit with us in that grief, and support us and love us in that grief, and not judge us and put a timeline on us, because this is what's creating that loop in our minds. It's a whole nother layer of shame, and that goes all the way back to the first thing we talked about. I'm permanently broken. This is my fault. I'm grieving, excessively because I'm fundamentally flawed, and I'm suffering because of me, and that's not truth. It's not truth by any shadow of a doubt. Is that truth at all? And we need to get out of that mindset as soon as we possibly can. After a certain point, people expect you to be back to normal, or even worse. You start expecting it of yourself, which is even harder. You have a good week, and you think, finally I'm getting better. Then there's a trigger, or there's an emotional flashback, and just a bad day hits you, and you feel like you're right back at square one. Okay, and there's nothing wrong with this. In that moment, this thought screams at you, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you stronger? Why aren't you resilient? Why aren't you getting over this? You should be over this by now. This thought is so damaging because it judges the healing process itself. It makes us feel weak and defective for having a natural response to an unnatural experience. And that is not fair, and it's not something that we can process. It's not something that we're going to be able to process. It's not humanly possible. Healing from trauma is not a straight line. It's not a ladder that you climb. It's more like a spiral. You will circle back to old feelings and old wounds again and again. And depending on the amount of trauma and the polytrauma you've been through, it's a deeper set of layers. There's more layers in that onion than maybe somebody else's onion has. And we need to understand that just as the trauma happened in layers, the healing also is going to happen in layers. And we need to let it happen the way that it's naturally going to happen and stop judging ourselves so harshly. Each time that we try to approach it from a slightly different place with a little more wisdom and a little more strength, we compare our journey to someone else's or to some imaginary finish line. It's a recipe for despair. We are setting unrealistic expectations that we can't achieve, which is just going to fuel the hopelessness and the despair. It ignores the reality that there are good days and bad days, steps forward and steps backward. The pressure to be healed can cause us to hide our own struggles, which only increases our isolation. It increases our inability to heal, because we are doing the same thing that we did before. We're literally repressing our own emotions and feelings, and the very things that we should be trying to process and to do in a healthy way, we're just putting back in the Rolodex and in the filing cabinet again. And so, God gives grace for us, and we need to learn to give ourselves grace. We would never tell someone, because we are caring people with CPTSD. So think about it. We would never tell somebody with a deeply fractured bone to just get up and run, or, your bone should have healed by now. You should be off of those crutches by now. I mean, come on, man. What kind of sissy are you? Suck it up. Get up and run. It's just a fracture, right? We wouldn't do that, okay? So we need to give our mind and our heart the same patience and kindness, okay? These thoughts that we've talked about today, they're like thieves. We need to see them for what they are, okay? They are there to steal our peace, our joy, and our sense of safety, and especially our connection to others, okay? There are echoes of a painful past, but they do not have to be the blueprint for our futures. Recognizing them is the first and most powerful step, is that we recognize that these thoughts are going to loop and that they happen. And then, when we can start naming these thoughts, and, that is the "it's my fault" loop, or "this is my brain trying to keep me safe by imagining the worst." We start taking away some of the power of these beliefs, and they don't have as much power, and they don't have as much ability to rule our lives and to dictate our future. We start to create a small space between us and the thoughts, okay? And in that space, there is freedom. And that freedom is amazing. In that space, we can remember that we are not our thoughts. It doesn't have to be reality. We are only one who observes the thoughts, okay? These patterns were created to survive an unbearable situation, and they are a testament to our resilience. And just as they were learned, they can be unlearned. Our future can be written differently. We can experience healing. We can reframe. We can renew, and we can be restored. And we need to understand that we can have that hope, that it's absolutely possible, okay? With time and patience and with compassion for yourself. These are things that can absolutely happen. If this video resonated with you, or some of the thoughts that I've talked about are things that you experience, or if maybe there's some thoughts in your loop that continue to play that we didn't mention, please put it in the comments. I would love to get your feedback. Thank you so much for listening today. I truly hope in my heart that this video resonates with you and helps you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming back every week and listening. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel if this is something that is worthwhile for you. And we thank you so much, and we will see you next time.